On May 18, 1899, in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, a little boy is born, and they named him Thomas. Throughout history, this boy is going to be one of the most important people in the world, Thomas Midgley. Thomas Midgley is not that famous where you can compare him to inventors like Thomas Edison. He's very famous for a few different things. Midgley came from a family that were all engineers and inventors, and they had a lot on their resume. Like for example, his father worked at the laboratory of a tire factory to make the quality of the rubber better. Another example is this handsaw. This was invented by Thomas Wrigley's maternal mother, a person named James Emerson, and that is why they were a wealthy family, and most of the fortune came from the invention of the handsaw. But let's continue. Thomas grows up, continues going to school, and gets accepted to Cornell University, and he decides to study mechanical engineering. And 4 years later, in 1911, he gets his degree. If you've seen our video about the life of Henry Ford, you'll know that the most important city during the Industrial Revolution was Detroit, where Henry Ford was born. Another very important city during the Industrial Revolution was the city of Dayton, Ohio. And since Thomas had a degree in mechanical engineering, he was kind of forced to move to one of these cities to get a proper job. He gets hired in Dayton, Ohio by a laboratory that's being ran by General Motors. When Thomas Midgley gets hired by General Motors, they had a specific task for him, and that was to figure out a way to get rid of engine knock. But what the heck is engine knock? Knocking basically means your engine is not properly working. It could be a problem with air-fuel ratio, or in simple terms, your engine is misfiring. In this case, the engine does not run smoothly. It uses more fuel, it causes more pollution, and the biggest problem for back then was the noise of it and shaking. So Thomas gets started to figure out how he can stop this knocking. Not only was he a mechanical engineer, but he was somewhat of a chemist as well. And since he grew up around inventors and engineers, he was very familiar with chemistry as well. This is how he begins. He takes a printout of a periodic table and puts it in front of him. And one by one, he tests with each element to figure out which works best. He does this for about 10 years, and he creates a whole lot of different inventions and patents. But when we get to 1921, he figures something out. He mixes an element with gasoline that literally gets rid of the engine knock. But what was that element? You've probably know this, but it's lead. When Thomas Midgley mixed the lead with the gasoline, he realized that there is always a trace of lead inside the engine cylinder, and in long terms, it could damage the engine. So he had to go back to the drawing board, and he figured something else out. He added ethylene bromide, and that made it work like butter. There was no excessive lead inside the cylinder, and it all exited the engine through the exhaust. You could say Thomas Midgley felt like a winner after figuring this out, but he didn't know that what he had figured out was gonna cause a lot of damage through the next 60 years. When General Motors realizes what type of a gasoline Thomas has created, they give him a thumbs up and start using this gasoline additive and selling it to car owners. Of course, General Motors plus a lot of people knew lead is extremely poisonous. So when they advertised this additive for their gasoline, they didn't use the word lead inside it whatsoever. They just used the word ethyl. It was advertised mostly as an anti-knock compound where you add it to your gasoline. So as soon as it hit the market, it was extremely popular. To produce this type of gasoline additive, they created a refinery so they can produce it. But the first month, 8 people died from lead poisoning. but since it was such a good product for selling, nobody spoke about it to see what happened. So after this happened, leaded gasoline was added to every gas station in America, and after that, the entire world. But since they had the market, they advertised it as leaded gasoline, since everybody loved it. Since their car ran smoothly, they didn't care. At this time, Thomas Midgley is only 30 years old, but he has invented something that has gone worldwide in less than 2 years. So he was excited to continue his inventions and figure new things out. 1 year after inventing the leaded gasoline, he wanted to create a type of gas where it could be considered a refrigerant and it could be added to refrigerators. Same thing, he started off with the periodic table and started mixing different gas and elements together to see what happens. The type of gas he was looking for was basically called Freon, which is a type of refrigerant, and it's called Freon to this day. Thomas was patient and he was very interested, so one by one he would mix these different elements to figure out different things. And throughout all these experiments, he had created new patents. And after 5 years, he figured something out. He creates a gas, and this is the formula. It consists of 3 elements of carbon, chlorine, and fluorine. He names the gas Freon 12, which later on became R12. Thomas did something for engines to run smoothly throughout the world, and he figured out a gas that could reliably cool a refrigerator. At this time, there is no AC for vehicles. Thomas had created more than 100 inventions, but 2 of them were worldwide. Even though they poisoned a lot of people, but at that time, it was extremely important. Midgley didn't live for very long. At the age of only 55, he died of polio in the year 1944. For more than 30 years after Midgley's death, his inventions were used worldwide. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1970s, scientists realized that the number of leaded poisoning has rising daily, especially for people that live in crowded cities. So they came to a conclusion that it's the leaded gasoline getting out of the exhaust pipes and flowing through the air where people breathe it in. Not only does it affect people that were older, but it also lowered the IQ of young people, especially kids. All of a sudden, news like this explodes throughout the world. But the people that were running this filthy business had a lot of power, so they started creating anti-propaganda, where they said these scientists don't know what they're saying, and we've tested everything and it's completely safe. The war between the scientists and the oil companies and the people in charge went on for 5 years, and when we get to the 1980s, finally the US government becomes the first government to ban leaded gasoline. It has been 40 years since this law has been passed, but every gas station in America still says unleaded gas, even though leaded gas is very illegal. After this law, every other country followed along with the United States and they banned leaded gasoline. But since the invention of leaded gasoline, meaning the year 1922, it had been more than 60 years where leaded gasoline was sold worldwide. So that is why scientists came up with a number that leaded gasoline worldwide have poisoned and killed more than 100 million people. At this time, the gas Thomas Midgley had invented, meaning R12, is being used as a refrigerant everywhere. Refrigerators, AC, car AC, and any other thing that cools things down. When we get to 1974, for the very first time, a group of scientists in the US realized that mainly R12 or other CFCs are putting a hole in the ozone layer. Scientists finally publish a paper and say CFCs and mainly R12 are putting a hole in the ozone layer. If the hole gets too large, the UV lights from the sun will hit us and cause us to get skin cancer. But even with the article, nobody cared. 12 years after this article was published, meaning in the year 1986, scientists finally realized that on top of Antarctica, the ozone layer is getting very thin. Only 1 year after this incident, meaning in September 1987, the Montreal Protocol was signed. The Montreal Protocol is very famous in a way where for the very first and last time, every single country agreed with one another. And we've made a video about this protocol if you would like to see it. In this protocol, it basically said that until 1989, we should get rid of CFCs, especially R12. When NASA analyzed the ozone layer in 2015, it realized that it's actually beginning to repair itself. Throughout the years, there have been plenty of inventors. Some famous, some not famous. Thomas Midgley had more than 100 patents, but 2 of them were one of the most famous inventions in the world. One of his inventions successfully poisoned more than 100 million people around the world, and the other invention put a hole in the ozone layer. He was just trying to figure out a way to make life easier and better, but his inventions didn't want to do that. Do you guys think that Thomas Midgley is responsible for killing more than 100 million people or not? Please comment.